Okay, everybody, welcome back to Of Stone and Clay. This is episode 89 with Brydon Brett today. Brydon is an incredible human I've known for a couple years probably, but haven't known super well. So I'm excited to get to know you better. We were talking about before the show how we've been in the same room a lot during really like intense conversations and moments and experiences, but haven't had a much one-on-one. So this is fun. Brydon's a lot of things. Ultimately, Brydon is an artist and a creator.
Yes.
You're a DJ, a producer, a singer, a songwriter, an author of The Artist's Disciple. We'll get into this later. This is if we could maybe
let's not zoom in on that.
This is Brydon wrote this in 2013.
Yeah, man.
Okay.
I couldn't believe when I came in, I saw that on the desk. I was like, you're crazy for this, bro.
You're like, how did you find that?
Yeah, seriously.
Sure enough, it's on Amazon.
Yes, it is.
We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but yeah, thanks so much for coming on here, man. It means a lot to have you, and our last episode we did with your wife Mina,
Yes,
which was awesome. Did you watch that episode or just parts?
Of course, I've watched the whole.
Yeah.
I've watched the clips you posted.
Yeah.
I haven't watched the whole thing yet, man. I haven't. I need to. I you know how it goes. Like I have a whole library of books. Makes me look really smart, and I've read maybe 5% of them.
Sure,
you know what I mean? Like, so there's so many more book recommendations and podcast recommendations that I can keep up with. So, but I should prioritize this one because my wife's freaking on it. So.
Well, and when you're like in your position, like people are constantly sending you songs and podcasts and videos, and you have a million friends that are in videos and podcasts, and it's never ending.
It's no excuse though. I mean, it's you and it's my wife. So so thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate that. Way to kick it off.
No, but what is it? Even just the clips. What's it like? Kind of seeing your wife shine a little bit, and because Mina is so special when she kind of unlocks. I don't know. There's something she unlocks, and she just starts going. And start speaking truth. And what's that like as her husband?
Yeah, I was kind of mentioning before the show a little bit that before I married her, I promised her mother particularly, like she pulled me to the side, and we had a conversation that I promised her that I would make sure to help facilitate Mina running her blueprint in life. That wouldn't, because she is the type who, even though she has so many gifts, she will be supportive. And she'll take a step back. And so it is one of my heart's greatest joys to take the little guy for a little bit, for a few hours, and let her come on a podcast, let her go do a gig, let her get in positions and situations where she can shine. And because she does, like when that gift unlocks, she's like a rabbi, like she has like almost a rabbinical calling, like where people just gather at her feet and she could just teach specifically out of scripture and Hebrew. Like that's where her deep water is. And she's a philosopher, a theologian. She's all the things, you know what I mean? And so, man, it's it's cool for me when people, especially from my circle, and they look at us and maybe we don't look like we go together, but when they get to see her, it's one of my greatest joys. And I know it's her greatest joy when people get to see me, because then they get to see a little glimpse of why we fell in love.
Right. Yeah. So I don't want to get too much into your guys' story because we talked about a decent amount with Mina.
Yeah.
But what was it that with you guys when you initially met and when you started courting, where you were like, oh, there's something different about this girl? Like, I don't know how much. Did you date a lot before you met her? Had you had a lot of relationships?
All right. I know we don't want to go deep, but I'll just give you a little bit of story. When I was growing up, people said, when are you going to start dating, or when are you going to get married? And I'm like 16 years old. And I said, getting married is not in my 11-year plan.
11-year?
11-year plan. I'm 16 years old because Michael Jordan didn't get married till he was 27.
Oh, of course.
So I didn't want to get married till I was 27 because basketball is everything.
Yeah.
And so my basketball, like I took my basketball to the movies. I took my basketball
Yeah.
to sleep at night. Like I named my basketball. So like basketball was it. So before I went
And
on,
you played a little college ball,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So before college, I maybe did a total of 2 or 3 dates, and I was almost under duress. I didn't want to do any of them. Right?
Yeah.
So anyway,
You're like, these chicks are trying to keep me out the league.
right, right, exactly.
You're crazy.
Yeah. So I was very focused.
Yeah.
And so then did some college, went on a 2-year mission for my church, and then came back after that, and I got engaged quickly,
Mm-hmm.
and that didn't go how it was supposed to go, and that's a whole learning experience. I'll have to hit you up on the side about that because actually that's a pretty cool experience. But anyway, so long story short, I was going through my 20s, in and out of dating, in and out of different relationships, learning along the way. The year before I met Mina, though, was a year where I was getting that message from everybody that, okay, you're a menace to society. You know, you shouldn't, all this, the pressure societally, spiritually, from my spiritual culture.
Yeah, I've been a menace, so I can
Dude,
relate.
and don't even get me started on the attribution of the quote and everything. But yeah, but I started feeling the pressure of that, and we did a show with my family. So I would do hundreds of shows a year, and I have all these people after the show come up. Well, why aren't you married yet?
Yeah.
You should marry my granddaughter.
Right.
She'd be perfect for you. She's a psychiatrist or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean? And so anyway, that whole year before I met Mina, I started getting really serious. So I dated a lot, And I got to the end of the year just burnt out. I was just chasing marriage. And I actually did hear this quote, and it's actually, there's humor to it, but this pastor said, a lot of you guys out there are wondering how you're going to find your wife. He said, I'll tell you how to do it. You run toward God with all your heart, mind, and strength. Look to your side. Whoever's running next to you, she's the one.
Interesting.
And if she's ugly, run faster.
Yeah.
Right.
Get ahead of her.
Yeah, right. So the humor hit home, but really that was like it knocked me over. I'm like, okay, Lord, yes, I've been chasing marriage, been chasing the wrong thing. And so I immediately discontinued that chase, that even the relationships I was in. I said, God, I'm just chasing after you. 7 days later, I meet Mina in Germany.
Wow, yeah.
And so that was kind of I did date a lot that year, but I learned from that. And then God just brought her into my life, and he used her to systematically deconstruct every belief I ever had and reconstruct something way more beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was it about her that was so just like glaringly different?
Well, okay. So
I mean, you could say everything.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know, man. It's kind of weird. Like since the time I was a kid, I always knew I wasn't going to marry a Caucasian woman.
Really?
You
always,
just this inner
you're like Michael Jordan didn't.
Right. So I just had this inner
You're like,
knowing.
I'm a hooper. I'm going to marry a black girl.
Right. So I had this inner knowing, and it wasn't even, it didn't have to be an African American woman or anything like that. It's just, I just knew that. And like, there's just like these moments in life where the things click, and you just like, okay, that's an important piece. I know that's going to be important. And then anyway, so all of that culminated, and we met backstage in Germany, and there's an energy shift in the backstage area, and I told her, hey, we'll come see your set. So my brother Garen and we said, yeah, we'll come see your set, which as a performer, that's the last thing you want to do when you're on break is go see someone else's set, right? And like, because you just want to chill. But we actually did it, and while she's on stage, everybody else comes up for a solo, and she hadn't sung a solo yet. So I'm just thinking maybe she's like the choir girl, like with the robes on that looks pretty.
Yeah.
But then she sings the last song, and she just blew me away. Somewhere along that concert, I looked over at my brother and said, I'm going to marry that girl someday. And I was like, what am I saying?
Yeah.
Number one, I know she doesn't come from my religious tradition.
Right.
And I know there's going to be cultural differences. She's from New York. But despite all of our probably because we both come from like teaching youth, like we just basically violated everything we ever taught our youth, like say, okay, we're going to pursue this thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, we did. So what struck me was obviously external features. Obviously that matters, but there was a spiritual resonance. There was something about her that I knew I needed. And even if I never married her, I knew that there was something about this relationship that's going to bring me closer to God.
She needed to be in your life in some capacity.
Had to be in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is crazy. And she prayed this prayer when she was a kid that whoever married her, she said, Lord, keep me so hidden in you that whoever marries me has to go through you to get to me.
as a kid.
as a girl, like she prays this
Yeah.
prayer, and so I had to go through him to get to her,
Mhm.
and so whether or not I ever got to her, I got closer to him,
Right.
and then I got him and her.
Yeah.
It worked out great. So
Yeah. You ended up just getting everything you ever wanted.
yeah, for sure. And we talked before the show, like with me, like my life is, I'm just kind of like, I've got to that point now where like I'm not covert or overt. I'm just who I am. God's a huge part of my life,
Yeah.
but I don't force it down anybody's throat. So, you know, I talk about that because it's a huge part of what I do, but there's also a lot more to me, but he's the foundation.
Right.
You know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's fast forward a little bit and talk a little bit about marriage.
Yeah.
So one thing I'm always curious about, and it's funny, I wouldn't even ask this question to somebody who I felt like I didn't respect their relationship or
Okay.
didn't envy parts of it.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know all the nuance, but what is something you do to continually nurture your relationship and continue to have that love augment and have your connection grow?
Great question. So early on, well, no, number one, like we did long distance dating for essentially 5 years.
Yeah.
Right. So we learned a lot through that process. Once we got married, we knew we wanted to, I kind of view life like almost like a Jenga tower or like a like a skyscraper with different, you know, rooms and everything. And our marriage room was dimly lit, but we wanted it to be fully lit up. So we put a lot of focus on, okay, who are the mentors we're going to listen to? Who are we going to what principles are we actually going to implement into our marriage? Like that's a big part of our life. And so we started looking, and we found a institution called the Gottman Institute. John Gottman and his wife, they've done research for years, and they've been able to predict, like based on indicators they see in a relationship, based on like a 20-minute interview or something like that. They can predict with like 90% accuracy if a couple's going to get divorced.
Oh, really?
Or if they're going to stay together, just based on certain things.
Is it a lot of personality compatibility or just how they act?
Behavior.
Yeah, just behavior.
Just behavior. And yeah, they read it in the personality. Like, no, they read it in the behavior. Like, they're obviously personality traits, but like basically it's like almost take a scientific approach to it. Like, you do these things, you can become a master couple. You do these things, you're going to be a disaster couple.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things is it's not enough to have one positive interaction for every one negative interaction. It's not enough to have 3 or 5. 20 to 1.
Oh, wow.
20 positive to every 1 negative. So that's something we do.
Yeah.
Their mantra is little things done often.
Yeah.
And so, yes, 20 to 1. Every night we do this routine where we will talk about 3 evidences of God we saw that day, 3 wins for the day, and then what 3 wins are we looking forward to tomorrow?
That's fun. That's awesome.
It's like a decompressing talk at the end of the day. We do that. We do weekly planning, like just a 5 to 10 minute sync up. What's the week looking like? We try to do that at the end of every day. And so those are like more logistical things, like, but these are habits, you know, that I knew that I had to, because I was in relationships where the fire wasn't there, where the chemistry, like, you have to have the spark.
Yeah.
I really believe you have to have the spark. But then, you know, to keep a fire going, it can't just be a spark.
Yeah.
And so these are the habits that we do on a regular basis that I think keep the flame going. And we're religious about our date nights. We do it every Friday night. Yeah. We have family night every week that we can. So just some of those habits we found have been pretty stabilizing and help to not just stabilize, but to grow.
Yeah.
To grow the love.
Yeah. I think that ritual, it seems, that you have at night has to be invaluable.
Yeah.
Because you have so many days where 80% of your day is running around and stress and anxiety about something you're planning or something you're doing. And so there might not be much negative, but maybe there's not a ton of positive either. It's just kind of a neutral day.
Yes,
right? Because you're going through the minutia of life. You're trying to find a babysitter. You're paying your taxes. You're doing a bunch of stupid adult stuff.
Yep.
But then to get together at night and find the micro of, like, what's something little that was beautiful that happened, or where we found God or whatever. I love that. Like, this girl I was dating, we would do a similar thing where at the end of the day she would ask me what my rose was for the day.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
And then she would say, okay, what was your thorn? Like, what was tough
Yeah.
on the day,
Yeah.
or what made you sad? And we started to do that kind of religiously, and it became kind of this funny thing where sometimes I would ask her what her thorn was, and she would kind of be like, well, my thorn was like you didn't come over till 9 or whatever. Like, so I only got to hang out with you for 3 hours instead of 4. Like,
God.
you know, but it became so cool because it's just like when you practice gratitude, you start to see things more.
Mhm.
And when you're looking for what was our rose together,
Yeah.
you know, it becomes something you focus on,
Yeah.
and the negative stuff just kind of effervesces, you know.
Yes. Ooh, effervescence. Yeah. Yeah. So I actually have other questions, or like other comments about what you were just talking about, but I don't want to lose this question, and so I want to throw it back at you. The question is, I've heard people say, like, and I got this kind of counsel when I was dating and dating relationships, like that you don't want to have too many like intimate spiritual experiences. Like I would even have people say, don't pray with them, don't like do a scripture study or whatever with someone you're dating, because you start to mix spiritual impressions with emotions, and that makes it hard for you to discern of whether or not they should be your partner. And so as you were talking about, like, the routines with one of your previous girlfriends, I'm curious, like, what's your take on that line of thinking? Do you think that's right or nah?
I think that's an interesting counsel that I think is maybe helpful if you're a little younger, a little less experienced, a little naive. No one wants to think they're naive, but I think at this stage of my life, I've dated enough where that's not a problem.
Yeah.
I do think, just like any other like aspects of a relationship, I think you don't want to go too deep too soon because you don't want to spook someone, right?
Right.
You want to have a little bit of calculated indifference, right? Because it's almost a miracle that two people fall in love at the same time. Right. Like usually somebody falls a little bit before.
Yes.
Even though the other person is kind of about ready to fall, usually like it doesn't happen the exact same time. That's why it's usually not smart to say I love you the second you feel it.
Right.
And so similarly, like if I'm dating a girl and we've been going out for 2 weeks, I probably don't want to like start praying together.
Right.
Although that might strengthen us, she might think, what, like, this guy think he's my husband? Like,
Right.
What are we praying over? Like, let's just let this happen organically. And so, but I also don't like the idea. I think some people, whether it's on purpose or not, they kind of use God and spiritual matters to manipulate the other person. Because I do believe God can tell you, like, hey, this is the right person for you, but the person has their free agency and can say, I'm not interested.
Yep.
And so I think sometimes people get this feeling that this is my person.
Yep.
And so let me try to convince you that this is correct and that I got this confirmation from God. Whereas to me, I'm like, maybe God even put that in your heart, but they have their own spiritual experience and their own free agency. And I also don't think God says, this is your person, this is your person,
Right.
here's your soulmate, here's your soulmate. I think he says, can you two be really happy together? Can you two love each other? Can you two make a beautiful life together? And if so, here's kind of my blessing, but you have your free agency.
Yeah. And
you have your preferences and your interests. And so I try not to, and maybe I'm like in my, as an LDS member, maybe I'm in the minority where I almost don't feel the need to like pray to see if this girl is the right girl for me because I already feel it.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm like, if I'm looking for extra confirmation, I'm probably in a doubting stage. And I don't want there to be doubt with the person I'm ending up with.
Yeah.
I want to be so certain. And I feel like I can go in with that certainty. And if If it's wrong, God will let me know. I don't need to go before him and say, like, is this the right girl?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's a bad practice, but for me, like, when I'm crazy about a girl, like, there's no doubt about it.
Right.
You know, there's no like, oh, let me go check. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. No, and that's all really good. So here's where I struggle, and I'm just gonna be like totally honest about this, and just love to get your take on this, because we've talked enough, and I know a little bit about your journey with relationship, right? And you said, and I agree that God doesn't have a soulmate for every single person, right? But then I look at my story with Mina,
And it feels like a soulmate.
and it feels like, yeah, we could have been happy with other people,
Sure.
but the arc of our life, it feels very much like God had a blueprint, and it's other things could have happened with other people, but like there's specific things that he wanted to have happen because of our marriage. So I struggle with that. So, and I almost feel guilty because I've had that experience. We went through hell to get to heaven.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's people don't understand the price that we paid to have the relationship we have. But yeah, I mean, how does that make you feel like when you see, because honestly, I do feel guilty. Like, but when you see a relationship where it does look like the stars aligned like that, how does that make you feel?
This is so tricky because to tell you the truth, like intellectually in my brain, I think, okay, people don't have soulmates. Right. They look for somebody, they find somebody, they foster love together and they make it work. But I also believe there's a bit of magic and mystical factors in all this that I don't understand. And you can call it God, you can call it fate, you can call it destiny, you can call it kismet. But to me, it's like when I look at these couples that I'm like, man, they have something different. They have something special. Most of them talk like you and say like, yeah, I don't know if I believe it, but like, she's my soulmate.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And then the couples that I know that I see them bicker, I see them resent each other, I see them struggle. I hear them say things like, look, man, you just got to find somebody and you just got to make it work.
Right.
Right. And they approach love with more logic than they do feeling. And there's definitely logic involved. And like you said, like with your partner, there's a lot of logistics. There's a lot of kind of boring aspects like scheduling and figuring out, just minutia of life. But I don't know, man. There's just a difference with certain people where you can feel like there's just a little bit of magic.
Yeah.
And so I try not to get too caught up in semantics of like, what is a soulmate? What does that mean?
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know. I want to be with somebody that it feels like, the universe kind of worked together in our favor and gave me that person. And I think for me, when it happens, it's going to feel like a miracle.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can call that destiny, you can call it a soulmate, or you can just call it, a work of God. I don't know. Like I said, I don't want to get too wrapped up in what to call it.
Right.
But I'm just not interested in mediocre love. Pass.
Come on. That's good. Yeah. I hear you. Yeah. And I guess I was the same way, but it's a gargantuan risk because you might pass up all these amazing options, right?
Listen, I've been with some amazing girls.
Yeah.
And frankly, a decent amount of girls that would have married me and have expressed that they would have married me. And I look back and I'm like, gosh, we would have had, I don't know, pretty decent lives.
Right.
Good person, attractive, fun, smart, whatever. But then you get with somebody where you can feel the magic. You can feel that extra echelon of connection.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, I can't settle for anything else.
Yeah, man.
I can't.
Yeah.
And it's not fair to them and it's not fair to me. And here's where things maybe get a little controversial. I feel like there are certain people that have just a greater capacity for joy and love. I don't know if that's true.
Right.
It's something I feel. And so for me, those people have to find each other.
Interesting.
You know?
Okay.
And so there's some people that love isn't a top priority for them.
Mm-hmm.
They want security. They want a family.
Right.
They want safety. They want companionship. They want friendship. But love isn't at the forefront. It's not something that they need to make their souls move forward.
Yeah.
You know, but I do.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I get it. I totally get it. I mean, I was 34 when I finally got married. I waited a long time, passed up on a lot of other options, and because there's just something that never could feel congruent to my spirit about anything else. And I had to take all the best and everything, and then somehow it's a miracle. It's just a miracle that I ended up with a woman who had all the things that I'd learned from all my previous relationships that I wanted.
Yeah.
And I got to this point where I knew so clearly what I wanted. I actually had it on a vision board.
Mm-hmm.
I won't even tell you what's on the vision board, but it involved Alicia Keys. Anyway,
of course.
But I was very clear at some point that I knew I needed certain elements, and one of them was this connection, the same connection I had with some of my best bros, where I didn't have to force anything, where I didn't have to, where just getting together was like riding a bike, where there could be companionable silence, you didn't have to say anything, just be in the car together, and we were still bros. And so my wife is a bro in the best way, right?
Yeah.
And so I was blessed to end up with that, but I recognized that it was a risk. Somewhere though, early on, probably that relationship I was talking about earlier, like my engagement, I had a very wise friend, my dad's best friend, and he actually passed away, who just sat me down and said, "Does she give you the spark?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the spark?" And he said, I look at my wife 30 years later, and we've changed. Our bodies have changed. Everything has changed, but when I see her, there's still a spark.
Yeah.
He said, "You need a spark."
Yeah, you're kind of stoked when she walks in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had to admit that I didn't experience that.
Yeah.
And I'd never experienced it in any relationship until later on. And I knew once I experienced it in that relationship that it was important to me. And so then when I saw it again in Mina, greater than ever before, I was like, okay, yeah, it's there.
Yeah.
But then that's back to all the habits, right? Then you have to have those habits. So we talked about the spark earlier, So
yeah.
Anyway, man, yeah.
That's awesome.
Interesting.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to do is to talk to people that I think have really beautiful, esteemable relationships, because that's what I want. And so, because it's funny, everyone likes talking about relationships,
right?
For better or worse. A lot of people like ragging on their partners or just talking about how tough it is. But the couples that I admire and that I love so much, they're always just building up their partner, and they're always talking about how amazing they are. And I'm like, well, that's an obvious difference. That's an obvious, because people talk so much about, you'll understand when you get married, bro.
Right.
It's not all peaches and cream, and there's a lot of compromise and there's a lot of tough blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, I get it, but I'm looking at a lot of couples that all I hear is positive things.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean they're not going through stuff, but they're just so, you know what it is? It's selflessness.
That's right.
They're so invested in their partner's success, invested in their partner's happiness, that there's no more bandwidth for complaining.
Yeah.
And for bemoaning and denigrating. There's no room for it.
No.
But
it can creep in easily because that's the culture.
Yeah.
So it bothers my wife so much because I have a lot of more mature people. Back in Branson, we would do shows all the time, and they saw me on stage as this professional idiot, I put out this persona where I was kind of a whatever on stage, and it was pretty goofy and silly. And so they would see her and I together off stage, and the immediate comment was going to be something like, "How do you put up with this guy?" Well, you really married down, didn't you? And she just corrects them in the moment. She doesn't put up with any of that because those are seeds that can grow. and we don't joke around about marriage either. Like that was one of the kind of commitments we made to each other early on. Is we don't joke around about the cage or the
ball
and chain, all that stuff. No, we don't even mess around with that because so that positive 20 positive to every one negative, we really try to do that, and I can't say we're perfect, but to the degree that we do that, and that whole evening routine of looking for the wins and the evidences of God. It's like when you buy a Volkswagen Beetle, all of a sudden you see a bunch of Volkswagen Beetles on the road, your reticular activators go off and you start seeing what you're looking for. And that's how it is in our relationship.
Yeah, that's true. With all these creative endeavors, with DJing and producing, and you have your band Prince Ivan, and you have your much bigger band, The King Will Come.
Much bigger, 10 times bigger.
And you have writing, and you have entrepreneurial endeavors. What's the thing that really lights up your soul the most, that brings you the most joy and most fulfillment out of all those creative aspects?
Yeah, so I was kind of going through a personal brand and a personal blueprinting process and trying to uncover that so I could kind of message it. And ultimately what I ended up putting in my tagline is change artist. I love seeing positive change. I'm obsessed with the idea of what Jesus said in the prayer, the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That idea of heaven and earth merging, that Jewish concept, tikkun olam, where we partner with God to finish the work of creating heaven on earth here. I'm obsessed with that idea. So that comes down to, and so that leads me into Dr. King's vision of beloved community and just world transformation. One of the relationships I had that didn't go where we both thought it would go, she helped me see. One day she said she helped me see like what makes me tick, and she said, "You're a world changer. I see you don't get fired up about anything unless it's going to be like macro, like world change, like that's what you are." And I was like, "You're right. I think macro. I think macro all the way down to micro, where I'm just very much day to day and executing. But everything I'm doing has a funnels toward a much larger purpose. And so for me, all the things you mentioned, they're woven together in that single thread of trying to affect positive change, if you will, cultural change, but ultimately doing it trying to bring heaven to earth. So to answer your question, I find joy in all creative pursuits as long as they're kind of purpose in that direction. Of all those things, my favorite thing to do, like I've had more, I enjoy being on stage. It's fine. I'm not a spotlighter. I don't have to be on stage. I've had the most enjoyable creative moments in the studio by myself when I've been spiritually creating in my imagination the experience that people are going to have. When I see it, when I can feel it, it's like it's already happened. And very rarely have I experienced the physical manifestation of what I experienced kind of spiritually and in my imagination. So it's like some of the greatest highs I've had have just been me and God in the studio, like creating a spiritual world together, and then taking on the challenge of executing that, seeing if we can manifest it. You know, that makes sense. So I love producing music. I love writing. I love that creative process. It's so spiritual. It gets me so fired up.
That's cool. Yeah. And so ultimately, you're interested in change.
Yeah, man.
You're interested in moving the needle.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
How do you deal with this? I feel like this is kind of the artist's dilemma, where you're obsessed with your art, you're obsessed with creating and putting things in the world, but you also, for the needle to move more, for the ball to be pushed further, you also need to kind of concern yourself with commerce and marketing. And all the things that most artists aren't as naturally gifted at. Right. And then how do you deal with, I just put 200 hours into this song and now I have 20 streams.
Yeah. Right.
And it's not being received like I thought it would, or it's not moving the needle. It's not making change that I hoped it would. How do you remain positive moving towards the next project? I mean, maybe this is an impossible question.
Well, yeah, I mean, you stacked it. Okay. Well, I mean, all those together. So number one, like I'm extremely passionate about this topic because I believe that artists, musical artists in particular, but artists in general, are at the point of the spear when it comes to cultural change. I also believe, in my belief system that there is an adversarial energy, we call him the devil, whatever you want to call. And if I were the devil, I would understand how the world system works. I would understand how individual systems work, and I would understand that everything starts with ideology. Everything starts with belief systems. And as far as cultural change is concerned, I would then attack the very thing that has the most impact on culture. So Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "Give me all the musicians in the world, and you can keep the lawmakers, because musicians write the laws."
Yeah.
Okay? So if I'm the devil, I'm going to go after the musicians, and I'm going to make it really hard for the ones who have light and truth and goodness to add to this world. I'm going to make it really hard for them to have a voice and a platform.
Yeah.
So I'm going to gatekeep, and I'm going to make sure that my agenda is propounded from that platform. So I don't know if you're familiar with the 7 mountains idea, that there's 7 mountains of culture, and that whoever stands at the tops of those mountains kind of controls the overall culture. There's business, government, arts and entertainment, etc. And so anyway, to answer your question, man, like I feel like it's truly a diabolical thing that it's so hard for artists to make a living.
Yeah.
Because in terms of value to society, it doesn't make sense. But it's also so hard to see the impact that we're making. But we're literally, like music, for instance, has the power to bypass the intellect, go straight to the heart. What has the power to do that, to influence belief systems in that way? It's very difficult. So if you can control the music, you can control the education, if you can control the literature, the podcasts, everything, right? Then you can have a massive impact on culture.
Yeah.
So all that to say, like, I'm very passionate about helping artists to make a living, to create sustainability for artists, to actually receive the value monetarily that they are adding actually to society, and to believe in that. So, you've hit on a real passion point for me with that. And I think, to answer your question, I don't view them as separate things. There's no compartmentalization. I believe marketing is
Part of your art.
Very creative part of my art, but I think I produce something really great, and I just want to get it out to the world, right? But I've become much more I'm very much an artist, but I'm also like a 50-50 left and right, and so I can think on the business side very much, and so I get thrown to managerial positions all the time because I can. And so I see it also as holistic. And if the goal is impact, then it all has to work together.
Yeah.
And so I think in its purest form, it's all art. And money is just value. It's value exchange. It's an energy exchange. And so if I'm truly creating something of value, I believe there's a market for it, if you want to call it a market.
Right.
And it's my job in the marketing side of things to be creative enough to figure out how I can reach past all of the barriers to get to somebody's heart.
Yeah.
Because that's where it gets a little tricky, because in a perfect world, you would create art that is from your heart and spiritually aligned and all this, and it would just go out and connect with the right people. But there are those gatekeepers that are keeping it from connecting with the right people. But I believe every artist has an audience, and you just might have to go through a lot of barriers to find them.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah. It's interesting. I wonder if you relate with this, but I get so much out of podcasting, but then I also get so much out of writing, but it's such a different part of me that it feeds.
Yes.
And it's interesting because, like, writing a book, it might take me 2 or 3 years, and in that 2 or 3 years, not a soul like sees it or is impacted by it.
Yep.
Whereas I can make a podcast episode and 3 days later, thousands of people can see it, right?
Yes.
And so it's kind of weird, because sometimes with my writing, I get more down on myself because I'm like, what am I doing this for?
Yeah.
Is anyone ever going to read this? Is it ever going to get finished?
I hear you, bro.
You know? But it's interesting that when I'm deep into writing and I'm feeling somewhat of a flow state, like, that's when it's the most enriching, and like that's the artistry I'm most proud of, and I feel like I'm using my gifts the most. But it's so like, yeah, it feels like while it's happening, I don't know, sometimes I'm like, is it happening, or am I just like imagining this?
Right.
Because I don't see the fruits for so long.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's interesting how different parts of art and different aspects of art can just feed you in such different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. And to be clear, I don't, there are certain things that are commercial, that you have to do artistically, but an ideal scene for me is that flow state. That's the perfect term for it. It's like, that's where I'm most fulfilled, is when I'm in flow state. And I do have this underlying belief that if I create something that's truly inspired, that feeds me, that I know I got from an inspired source, I just have this feeling that there's a niche, there's an audience for it, and that it's meant to provide value, And so I really believe that the spiritual energy with which you create gets attached to that piece of, it's like Michael Jackson, like he talked about, people say, what do you want to be? He said, I want to be immortal. They didn't understand what he meant, not to live forever, but have his art live on forever.
Yeah.
And it does. And I think ours has that opportunity as well, if we're in the right spiritual state while we're creating it. But then after that, it's that pipeline to get it out to the world and have the right eyeballs on it. I haven't mastered that yet, but I'm passionate about that because I'm tired of the gatekeeping.
Yeah. Do you think about your art in terms of your own personal legacy and that immortality, and like when you pass away, having Brydon's canon of work? Do you think about that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do. I think my greatest, if I could just spend all my time doing what I really love, it'd just be creating works of intellectual property, whether it's books or music or podcasts or whatever, things that will outlive me, that can continue making a difference for people. And even just like I long for, Dan Sullivan calls them the four freedoms. I've freedom of time, money, relationship, and purpose. And I think I just want, when I think about my ideal life, I want to be able to create stuff that's going to impact people while I'm sleeping or while I'm dead.
Yeah.
And also be generating income because it's creating so much value in the marketplace. That would be an ideal situation where I can be in Barbados, just hanging with my family, but still having people, thousands of people being influenced by what I did.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get a little existential.
Let's go, bro.
What do you think is and you could answer for yourself or generally, but what do you think is the hardest part about being human? Just the hardest part about this crucible we go through in life?
There are two things that come to mind immediately. The ambiguity makes it simultaneously, when you embrace ambiguity, it makes life much more enriching. But if you crave certainty in life, you crave to know, to absolutely know, and you're not okay with the mystic part of life
and
the
chaos,
wonder and the adventure and the fact that there's more to know than you could ever know. If you can't embrace that, I think that can become a really dark hole where you, because if I start going too far down the rabbit hole of God and where he came from and all this, like I can get nihilistic very quickly.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Like, oh, am I even here? Right?
Yeah, what's the point of anything?
Right. I'm like Descartes, so doubt everything. So I think the ambiguity of life can be difficult, and kind of adjacent to that is suffering without purpose, I think that can be very difficult to wonder why. I know I've read this, that life is supposed to be this, but I'm not feeling that. I'm not experiencing that. And it can be one of life's greatest crucibles. I'm thinking particularly of people who struggle with mental, emotional health, who just, it doesn't seem like they're ever able to experience that fullness of feeling that other people get to feel. And some people go through their entire life that way, and that would be extremely difficult for me. And that's one of the things that I understand, the God answers for that, what we'd say at Sunday school, but sometimes they don't feel satisfactory.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know about you, but I've never had sort of chronic mental health issues, but there's always seasons where, you're going through a breakup or somebody, passes away, and it's like the colors are faded.
Yeah.
The the food isn't as good, things are just less vibrant, and you're like, you hold on to hope knowing that these seasons have come and go in the past. But I think for people in kind of the grips of a dark depression or mental illness, it's like, it just feels like an endless winter.
Yeah.
And like, even, as kind of a trite example, like in Utah, I hate the cold.
Yeah.
But I hold on to hope of knowing that, okay, winter is only so long. Like I can deal with,
right.
It being freezing outside for a couple months, because I know that spring and fall are going to come, but I think I would really struggle if I lived in Siberia.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it felt like an endless winter. And yeah, it feels unfair that some people are kind of stuck in that. And like you said, I think we all have our answers as to maybe how to get out of that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in the thick of it, a lot of times those answers don't really do much for you.
No. Yeah. I don't know, man. It's such an interesting question that you ask, because I do think about it, like what makes life difficult, but I'm also habitually like kind of optimistic. I've always had that native kind of cheery temperament, but also I've nurtured it. And there's a great book. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it. Dan Sullivan, Dr. Benjamin Hardy, The Gap and the Gain. The basic idea is that the majority of discontent comes from what he calls living in the gap. Mm-hmm. And the most happy people are those who live in the gain. It's the people who set a goal, and they were at 1, they set a goal to be at 30. They get to 22. People who live in the gain look at that 1 to 22 and like, wow, look, I made so much progress, and they're super happy in it. Those who are in the gap look at the missing 8. And they're so discontent. It wasn't good enough. It's never good enough. And they're measuring their life against an ideal, against a horizon that's constantly moving.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing about horizons. You never reach a horizon. Right. That's what ideals are. And because the minute you think you've met an ideal, your perception of the ideal changes. And you're like, oh, that was bigger than I thought it was, right? And so goals are good, but ideals are really hard to live. And so ideals and horizons exist to help us move toward them, but not necessarily to reach them. And so that whole gap in the gain principle, I think, is really, really important. It's been blessing my life a lot recently. And so I tend to live in that gain.
Yeah.
So when you ask this question of the suffering, what makes it hard, I have to kind of go to a place where it's been hard for me, because by and large for me, I see everything as a lesson, and I try to learn from it.
Yeah.
And I don't view things as obstacles, but as opportunities.
Yeah.
And so I guess maybe back to your question, like I think making that shift from gap to gain thinking might be one of the hardest things.
Yeah.
Because when you live life in the gain and you see everything as lessons and its beauty, even the really hard things, I think life takes a lot different shape.
Yeah.
And that which once looked very difficult now looks like an opportunity. And I think the other component to that for me, from my belief system as a follower of Jesus, is that I believe like the great purpose of life is for us to attain unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, to be conformed into his image and to become more and more like him, become more and more one with him. And so that prime directive gives shape to every experience and every suffering that I have.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that type of galvanizing principle, that coordinating principle, then it's easy to look at life as a gap. Everything looks like every difficulty looks like a loss.
Yeah.
And if you go down that rabbit hole for too long, it becomes a habit, becomes a way of thinking, a way of being, and ultimately influences your entire system.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think the hard part is, it sounds like you've probably sort of cultivated that mindset over decades.
Yes.
And probably a lot of that was due to your upbringing and your parents and your siblings. And so a lot of it is sort of natural.
Yeah.
And you've probably chipped away at it and evolved it and made it, more of just a everyday part of your life.
Yeah.
And now it's muscle memory.
Yes.
Right?
You're nailing it. Yeah.
But to like start that shift at like 30 or something has got to be so hard.
Yeah.
I had a cool experience a couple months ago. I don't know if you knew this, so random about me, but I play professional spike ball.
I do know this. Okay. I love spike ball, man.
So I went I went to this tournament and we didn't have a great showing. We got 5th place, whatever. But this kid I knew, he got 3rd place, and he was really upset. He was really bummed and felt like he underperformed, and he had he was having a breakout season though. He'd gotten his first place earlier that year, and I went and talked to him, and I said, "Bro, I know you're upset, and I've been there. I've been there where you get 3rd place and you have a little trophy, but you're pissed.
Yeah.
And you're upset." And I said, "But if you would have told yourself 2 years ago that you got 3rd place at this big tournament,
Yes.
you'd be over the moon."
Yes.
You know? And
yes.
so I said, "Think about how far you've come. And like, yeah, this sucks, but like, you'll go play better next tournament. But it is important to look at how far you've come, because like you said, the horizon's always moving.
Mm-hmm.
And now that you've gotten a taste of, you know, playing in a finals and winning, you're like, well, that's all I want to do."
Right.
Which is good.
Yeah.
But you have to give yourself some grace and say like, man, like, I'm getting 3rd place where like I used to never even get close.
Right.
And so look how far I've come.
Yes. It's like you read the book. I'm always like talking about the books I'm reading, and
Yeah.
it's like, but that gap in the game is exactly right. They use the AMB framework. Always measure backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you do that, you're like, whoa, look at how far I've come, right? Yes, it's beautiful that now I have this new vision of what I can become, but it's expanded. But wow, what a blessing! Everything is gain, everything is a lesson, and I'm improving. There's progress. So being a progressionist, not a perfectionist, and you're right. This has been cultivated through nature and nurture for years, right? So, and just like you, as a professional spike ball player, I would have to interview you for hours to pull out of you what's automatic, right?
Yeah.
The automaticity has happened, right? So like even you asked me this question as you're talking, I'm having further insights about, yeah, it's been a journey. I haven't always been in that mindset.
Yeah.
It's been cultivated.
Yeah.
But I have found that now that it is more automated, it's a much happier way to live.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. If you could kind of look back at your spiritual life and your quest to become a more spiritual being and become closer to God and influence people in that way, is there anything you would go back and change about your spiritual journey? Like, are there any stages of your life that you look back and kind of cringe and you're like, oh, like I didn't have it figured out then, but I thought I did. Like,
yeah.
My approach was wrong. My heart was in the right place, but my approach was wrong.
Mm-hmm. Great question. I have zero regrets. Not that I wouldn't go back and change things different and do things with what I know now. I would go back and do some things differently.
But just as a principle.
But I don't have any regrets, which is amazing to be able to say. But because I think I always did the best I could with what I knew at the time.
Yeah.
So that's great. And then again, my mind has categorized every negative experience, or the majority of negative experiences that I could categorize as negative as positive, because there was a lesson that I learned from them.
Yeah.
But having said that, it's the times in my life where I was elitist, exclusivistic, where I thought I was right and other people were wrong.
Yeah.
And I was more concerned with being right than what was right.
Right.
William George Jordan said something so beautiful. He said, "The man who has a certain religious belief and fears to discuss it," the man who has let me start that over again. William George Jordan said, "The man who has a certain religious belief and fears to discuss it, lest it may be proven wrong, is not loyal to his belief. He has but a coward's faithfulness to his prejudices. If he were a lover of truth, he'd be willing at any moment to surrender his belief for a higher, better, and truer faith."
Yeah.
And I lived a good part of my life more aligned with my prejudices than with what was actually right. And so I've got to this point. So if there's anything looking back at my journey, I'm just grateful I've transcended that for the most part. And I live now a life more based on grace for others and embracing the ambiguity and the mystery of life, more of an expanding paradigm that, you know what, I have this belief system right now, but I am fully aware that something could happen next year. And by next year, what is true to me now will be even more true or differently true. It's like that ascending spiral, right? You know, where you go from level A and then you go up here and you get to level C, and it looks remarkably like level A did, but it's now with more depth, more breadth. So it's not to say that there isn't absolute truth. It's just that your perception is always changing, always changing. And so my journey with faith, back to my relationship with Mina, when Mina came into my life, I had this beautiful library. And I had scripture memorized and quotes memorized, and all the books were in perfect order, and I worshiped the library. I worshiped the library, and God came into my life, and through Mina began to basically just knock the entire library down. And he took this book out, took that book out, added this book in, and has been helping me reconstruct the library. So I'm still in that process. And what I've realized is I'm never going to have that beautiful library again. It's always going to be under construction. I'm always going to be adding new books and changing my perception of other books. And I'm completely okay with that. You know, so the deconstruction, reconstruction paradigm, it's not even about reconstructing it to a perfect form. I think my new perfect form is that I'll get to a kind of a livable state, you know, where what I know is what I need for now, but it's always going to be expanding as my perception of him expands.
I love that. I even take that to heart when it comes to, like, when people ask you, like, what are your favorite movies of all time? What are your favorite books of all time? I used to be more like, this is my definitive list. But then I started, you know, reading more and watching more films, and I'm like, that's such a limiting, like, thing to say, this is for sure my top 5 books of all time, because that doesn't leave any room for a book to beat it. You know? And so, like, it's funny, I read a book a couple years ago, and I was like, it was almost like, ooh, like, this might sneak into my top 3. Like, I don't know if it, like, I feel bad, you know, because I have this curated, like, idea of my library and my all-time greats. But yeah, I think you need to be open to, having that be an evolving list. You know?
100%. You know, and adjacent to that principle, so I'm just pondering. Thank you so much for this conversation, because you do start living life day to day and you forget the journey you've been on. So you're helping me to reflect on my journey. And I remember as I had that library, and I really did worship it. One of the things that reset my paradigm on this was one of my spiritual mentors. He was talking about Jesus, and he said, Jesus is the truth, capital T. The scriptures are the truth, lowercase t, about the truth, capital T. Our theology or our doctrine is the truth about the truth about the truth. You can know the truth about the truth about the truth and still not know the truth. So when I started chasing God for real, that was when I realized the magnificence, the mystery of godliness, like, and that's where life got rich. When I lived in that the dogma or the doctrine of the theology and, like, worshiped that, then I was more concerned about the neatness of my library and being right. But when I started chasing after him, it expanded my whole world, and all of a sudden I got to see more the way that he saw, and how much he loves everybody, and how universal his plan is, how beautiful and merciful and just his plan is for everybody, and so that expanding paradigm, the more I understand him, the more my life expands, the more my belief systems expand, and I'm just okay with the fact that I understand him this much today, but I get to go on this journey where I can continue understanding him more and it's going to expand. But it really is pursuing that capital T truth that's opened that up for me.
Why do you think as humans we're so obsessed with being right? Because, like you said, I think sometimes we almost worship our own intellect and worship our own, like, stance on things.
I mean, ultimately, but, like, we know all the research, right, says that every negative emotion boils down to fear, right? But I think the other universal manifestation of fear is pride. And then C.S. Lewis said that pride is essentially competitive in nature. When the element of competition is gone, pride is gone. So to answer your question, it's like, for me, I think it is competitive, and I'm struggling with that because we live in a very competitive society, capitalism and all that.
And you're an athlete. You come from being competitive.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of utility in being that competitive.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So,
but it's so hard to remain competitive, which I don't think is innately bad.
Right.
But to be really competitive while eliminating your ego.
Yeah.
How do you find that balance?
Oof,
I saw this awesome interview with Derrick Rose.
Okay.
And they were talking about, his journey with going through all his injuries and stuff. And he's, somebody asked him about, is it hard going from what you used to be to what you are now? And, you were like an MVP caliber player and now you're kind of coming off the bench or whatever. And he's like, bro, I done killed my ego years ago, like from the things I've been through.
Yeah.
And so like now I'm just grateful to be playing the game I love, And so, but he's not any less competitive than he used to be,
right?
But he's let that ego go aside, and I think that's the balance you have to try to find. Is you can be fiercely competitive, and want to always push that horizon and be better and be better than your competitors, but I don't know. Can you do it with love and with grace?
Yeah, right. No, and I believe you can. And I think that with maturity, like Derek, he lived life and went through that kind of maturity. It's like when you talk about ego, the concepts of ego and identity are very close when you go back to the original meaning of ego, right? So if you can disassociate the competition and the winning, the victory, whatever it is, from your identity, which I think is what he had to do ultimately, right? So he could, in the moment, his desire for excellence, his desire to do well. Maybe he's competing against himself or against the people on the court. He was there, and he worked on the court, and he did what he had to do. But then I think what he's saying is like off the court, it no longer is his identity.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And I think that's huge. And being a recovering people pleaser, because I grew up on stage, and I grew up in basketball, so like that's crazy. Like you literally get paid for how many people clap for you. Yeah. And then in basketball, it's all performance based, right. And it's you're pitted against. It's crazy, man, when you think about it. So it's honestly a paradigm I'm really struggling with because I know that collaboration is a higher form, and I'm just struggling with the idea of competition. So it's a timely thing that you're bringing up because I believe it's at the root of some of my discontent in my life. Yeah, my inability to be present sometimes is because I'm still so concerned about competing and with that comparing. Yeah, so yeah.
It's
I don't have the answers to that one.
No, it's crazy. I'm so much better now, but I still struggle a little bit when I'm playing sports and I lose or have a bad performance, of not spiraling a little bit and thinking somehow this is related to my self-worth. Yeah. And somehow like sometimes I'll go into a really dark place. Yeah. And I'll like lose a close game or something, and I'll start thinking about, oh, and bro, you're not even married, and, right. And like like these things things aren't related at all. Right. But I just go down a dark hole. Yes. And I'm like, dude, these things are not related. Yeah. Like, but I just start thinking like, oh, I'm not good at this, and I guess I'm not good at this, and I guess my life sucks. Right. And it's such an unhealthy thing, but. I'm glad I'm a lot better than I was when I was younger because my self-worth isn't as tied up in what I do. But that's hard when, growing up, like I was the same way. All I cared about was basketball. Mm-hmm. And so if we lost and I played poorly, like I felt like my world was over. Yeah. Because that was my whole world. Yes. And I hear it. It's not that I didn't find joy and purpose in other things, but I was so young that I didn't feel like they were really important compared to basketball.
Yes, I hear it, man. Yes, come on, bro. Like, yeah, you're nailing it. Like, I'm thinking about a few different concepts to bring into this conversation. So, Stephen R. Covey, back before he wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he wrote a book called The Divine Center. Mm-hmm. And the idea being that you could have multiple centers in life. And those centers could essentially be idols for you. They could be lowercase g gods. Even great centers, like if you center your life on family or even on religion, and that's not necessarily God.
Yeah.
Right. So any other center would be, your system is not created to align with that, and so you're putting a cap on it. So if you put all of your worth into basketball or competition or family or work or whatever those things are, those are ultimately going to fail you.
Yeah.
And so you're setting yourself up for some life-shattering moments, right? Like you're talking about, and you got to go down that rabbit hole. And so that idea of whatever God is on the throne of your heart, and whatever truly is your center, I think is really important. And then I think about Leif Hetland. There's an author, Leif Hetland, and Erwin McManus. He pastors Mosaic Church in L.A. Two adjacent concepts. The one, Leif Hetland does this awesome work on what he calls the orphan spirit. That you can be in God, you can be in Christ, and you can be in the house, but still feel like an orphan because you haven't really accepted all that He's willing to give you as a good father. You haven't accepted that He's a good father. You haven't really accepted the gift or all that He's paid for. It's like having a bank account. Like He's got unlimited amounts of money in your bank account, or like you have a 401k that you never access. You know, it's all there, but you don't access it because of your paradigm that it's based on your worth, on your performance, and that's how you access it. But it's not based on your worth. It's based on His worth.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's where Erwin McManus says, because of what Jesus did for us, we no longer work for acceptance. We no longer work for acceptance. We work from acceptance. We no longer work for worthiness, but from worthiness. So if you have the foundation of grace, then I think that, and I'm working more and more on that, you do things from a different heart.
Yeah.
You know, it's faith and works, they go together. Where there's fire, there's smoke, but sometimes we confuse the smoke with the fire.
Yeah.
So if you have the fire of faith, there's going to be smoke.
Yeah.
But they're not to be flipped.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's cool. I want to read this quote to you, and I want to get your thoughts on it.
Yes, I can't wait.
I can't memorize things as good as you, so I got to read this. Dude, you're really good at memorizing stuff.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a gift I've cultivated, but it is actually a gift. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, this is by Frank Ocean.
Come on, Frank.
And he kind of wrote this letter to his younger self.
Okay.
And so I want you to kind of think about, as you're listening to it, a younger version of yourself, especially as an artist. He says, "Hey, Chris, your name is Frank now. It's a long story. Your girlfriend is about to break up with you because of the long distance. It's okay. And that job you're working, well, you're going to have to work there for another year and some months, and then you're going to get fired. You're going to work a couple more jobs after that, too. Nothing glamorous, Kinko's and AT&T, if you really want the specifics. But you're never going to be homeless or starving. Don't worry, you won't fail and have to move back to New Orleans either. You are going to get your heart broken, though, twice. If it helps, the first one is going to be worse than the second. Contrary to how it feels, it won't kill you. In fact, it's going to help you write an album. Yeah, you finally finished an album. People like it, man. You're actually going to write and record hundreds of songs. They won't all be good, and most people won't think you're talented at first, but you're going to master your gifts. You're going to become a lot stronger and wiser, even a little taller. Be patient. I mean, you kind of have no choice. And be good to people. I don't want to spoil too much for you, but you're on a plane right now to the East Coast to work with Kanye West and Jay-Z. It's all working out, kid. You made it." Isn't that awesome?
Wow. That is so good.
Yeah.
That is great.
Yeah. What does that make you think?
Well, a few things. I still, even as much as I've talked about living in the gain, it's the artist gap, that gap between your ambition and your ability. And I have this great ambition. I look at a Frank Ocean, and that's, I want to say those things that I've done hundreds of songs.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm saying? Like, so the first thing it makes, I'm just being like completely transparent, is like, it motivates me. I want to write that kind of letter to myself.
You want to be more prolific.
Yes, I want to be more prolific. I want to be able to say that. But having said that, I could write the same type of letter back to myself 10 years ago. And maybe the external trappings of success are not there just yet. but I know the arc I'm on, and I feel like I could write that same type of letter, and I would understand. My myself back then would kind of get it, but wouldn't totally get it, because back then I thought that you worked from the outside in, but now I know you work from the inside out. So the letter I would write to myself now would be more like, hey, you're going to go in this process where you learn that everything you thought, like I wrote this book, I was in no way prepared to be the kind of person to lead a movement.
Yeah.
And God knew it.
Yeah.
So he had to take me on a journey of deconstructing, reconstructing everything, because I was working from the outside in. He had to take me on the journey. So like, I don't think my former self would have understood it at the time, but I would have encouraged my 10 years ago self to say, hey, just stick with it, because by the time you get to the end of this journey, you will be able to have everything you ever wanted. Every dream you thought died was only being resurrected, and with glory on it. And you were actually thinking smaller back then than you should have been thinking.
Yeah.
There's more for you. And so it excites me, because while I haven't externally manifested everything, I feel like I'm on that same path, and just being patient in the journey and actually enjoying the journey and recognizing that the journey is sometimes, I mean, like day to day is really all you were guaranteed. Like, I think I could have written some of those things, but I'm just really inspired by that quote, man. Yeah. I hope that clip goes viral, because that is dope. Yeah, it's great.
It's what I love about it is he mentions the good and the bad. You know, he goes back and he's like, hey man, like, you're gonna go through some more tough times, you're gonna go through some heartbreak, but like, it's not that bad, and like this great thing is gonna happen. And I think it just gives you some perspective on life, because sometimes you just get so stuck in your present that you can't see the future, or your grind is so slow. You're like, yeah, I know eventually I'll finish this album or I'll finish this book, but like, it feels like I never will. Or it feels like my heart will never heal. Yeah. So it'd be great if I could receive a letter from future me.
Yes. 100%. Yeah. Oh yeah. How encouraging would that be, man? Yeah, that's really good. Makes me want to do that, actually.
Yeah, it makes me also want to write a letter to myself 10 years ago.
Yes.
Because there are parts of me that have grown that I didn't even realize needed to grow.
Yeah.
Or parts that I didn't think could grow this much.
Yeah.
And there are also parts that I'm like deeply disappointed and heartbroken about. But that I'll need a letter from 10 years in the future.
Right. Yeah. It was for the last 10 years. I feel like the last 10 years have been significant for a lot of people. I don't know why but that time frame has been. I've talked to a lot of people in the last 10 years, particularly, have been really interesting for people. Like for you, like what's been the greatest transformation for you in the last 10 years? What's been the journey you've been on?
Yeah. Gosh, I just feel like it's been everything. It's just been my adult life, But I think I've learned a lot about pain and the utility of pain and the utility of suffering. Have you read Man's Search for Meaning?
Yeah.
He talks so much about the utility of suffering. And I think I've found that, I think when I was younger, I used to struggle with just feeling like, like just being so upset with being upset and so sad that I'm sad. Instead of realizing like, man, this pain is kind of kinetic energy.
Yes.
This pain can make me way more empathetic and way more loving. This pain can make me a better partner. This pain can make me a better dad someday. And yeah, there's been a lot of pain connected with like not being married at my age,
right?
Especially in our culture. But over the last few years, I've actually found a lot of joy in realizing the kind of person it's made me.
Yes.
Which has been a hard, long realization, because I used to think that pain was just sort of an explanation of why I wasn't as a good a version of myself as I wanted to be, why I was a lesser version of myself. But the pain is kind of why I'm so great, and why I'm such a beautiful human. But gosh, it took me a long time to figure that out, you know. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm ultimately just so grateful for all the things I've been through because they've just molded me,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
And when you're young, it's so hard to get a grasp on that.
Yeah.
And not for everyone, because some people go through horrendous things when they're younger.
True.
And I think the majority of my pain has happened as an adult. You know, losing friends to suicide. You know,
Yeah.
losing loved ones as people get older. Going through heartbreak. Like, had a pretty good normal childhood, but just have kind of felt the pains of life as I've gotten older. And but man, it's stretched me, and now I feel like more than ever I can relate to almost anybody.
Yeah.
And not that I've, say somebody comes on the podcast and they're, a refugee from the Congo. Like, I can't
Right.
relate to their experience, but I can relate to pain.
Yeah.
And I can relate to, just general struggle and general empathy and nihilism and fatalism and all these things where I couldn't when I was 21.
Yeah.
I just didn't have the tools.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful for those tools.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, my wife and I were talking about that the other night. Like, how do you turn a traumatic, because there's, depends on who you talk to, but in the psychological field, there are a lot of people who understand that trauma is essentially not something that happened to you, but what you believe about what happened to you, which is, because there are truly horrible things that happen to people,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm fine calling that traumatized.
But it's crazy how they affect people differently.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? So for you to understand the utility of pain, we were talking about that, like when something truly traumatizing, or that could be traumatizing and cause severe problems down the line for somebody the rest of their life, how do you turn that into a gain situation?
Yeah.
And I think it's very difficult to think about the most horrendous circumstances and how you could, but I think maybe the one thing you could always look at something that's painful as an opportunity, because you went through it, and now you can help other people through it. And maybe that's the purpose you find in that pain.
Right.
That might be the only purpose you find in that pain.
Yeah.
But it's still a purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my favorite,
So sorry.
he passing away. One of my favorite guests, her name's Katie Owen, and she had left a polygamous group.
Yes.
And she talked a lot about her pain and suffering with that, but also she talked a lot about her younger years struggling with self-harm. And she felt like it was a gift because she had other young girls reach out to her, and she'd kind of conquered those demons.
Right.
And now she feels like, wow, what beautiful purpose I had in going through all that, because now I can help people that, who else are they going to talk about it with?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's hard when you're in the eye of the storm,
For sure.
to see that there's beauty in it and there's purpose in it, but there just is.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, like, how useful would that be to be able to recognize, when you're in it, what's going on. And to a degree, I'm a big proponent of feeling what you feel, but then not absolutely staying there, not absolutely believing the story, the narrative that can develop from that. And so I think there are two things. I'm thinking about Neil A. Maxwell. He's one of my favorites. He talked about how you can understand it takes a certain gift of discernment, but you can understand when you're in a defining moment. And I've been able to understand that, like what the King will come. Like, I've been in moments, even with you in the room, sometimes like, we're in the middle of a defining moment right now.
Yeah.
This is a pivot point.
Yeah. There's
something significant going on here. And so you're able to notice those types of moments. But then in struggle and pain, more specifically, in scripture, my wife, she talks about, there's a passage that's very obscure, but it talks about how God sits enthroned on the flood. In other words, the storm is coming, but he's up there on the top of the storm in a in his on his throne, looking down. And then there's a scripture that Paul in Hebrews talks about how we're seated with Christ in heavenly places. And so this idea that when we're in the eye of the storm, if we stay there, it is really difficult to see anything other than the eye of the storm. But if we can feel our feelings, but then submit those feelings over to God and say, Lord, take me up to your lap. Let me sit on your lap and see this from your perspective. Let me be seated with you in heavenly places. I'd like to be on the top of this storm with you to see how you're seeing it. And trying as much as possible in the moment to view things from that perspective, I think it influences your choices, So it's a useful exercise, if not anything, and to me, it's become more habitual for me to do that, to take my feelings to the Lord and say, okay, Lord, how do you see this? But that's not to say I don't feel the feelings, because I do, but to get out of it, that's been a useful mechanism, and it's helped me a lot.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of Man's Search for Meaning, he talks a lot about how he found it interesting that the people that tended to survive were people that were giving parts of their food away.
Interesting.
And were helping other people.
Yes.
And were going without. And the people that would steal bread and people that would do everything they could to survive in a selfish mode would often not survive.
Yes.
And to me, it just speaks volumes of, okay, you're in the eye of the storm. You're severely depressed. You're going through a breakup. Your parent just died. Your band just broke up, whatever. I feel like maybe the only way out of it, along with some other things, is to help people.
Yeah.
Right?
Which was essentially what Viktor Frankl was doing with his idea. At some point he decided, I can't remember exactly when in the experience, he decided, I'm going to get out of this and write a book about it.
Yeah.
So then that became his frame for seeing everything, which ultimately what he was saying was, I'm going to write a book that's going to help other people. Yeah. So it was a selfless frame that he then started seeing everything. Oh, how does this work? But people who didn't have that kind of purpose or hope, they like you said, became selfish. They were the ones who ended up, having different ends.
Dude, I don't know what it is. This last maybe 2-3 years of my life, I've been obsessed with the word hope. I've just loved it.
Come on, let's go.
And I just think sometimes that's all I need. Yeah. Like, I have all these problems and struggles and big feelings, but if I can just hold on to hope a little bit longer until tomorrow. I had an awesome guest, Rachel Winter. She's a close friend of mine. And I asked her to give me a piece of advice on the podcast as a friend.
Yeah.
And she said, I want you to have hope that like everything will be okay and you'll find your person and blah, blah, blah. But I know that's hard. So I want you to just have it, even if it's just for tonight, to just hold on to that hope, even if it's just for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful and it stuck with me. And it's honestly been one of the most healing episodes I've done.
Yeah.
Just having that thought of like, okay, I can just hold on to hope for one more hour.
Yeah.
I can hold on to a strand of it.
Yeah.
I don't need to have a firm 2-hand grasp. I can barely have hope in sight, and that's enough for me.
Okay. Yeah. So what's your definition of hope? Is it a feeling? Is it a abstract concept? Like, what is hope?
I had this realization a few months ago. Actually, I wrote this little essay about it. But to me, you read in the scriptures that essentially hope and faith are synonymous, right? That you can't really have faith without hope, and you can't have hope without faith.
Yeah.
Right. So I realized, like, when I'm feeling hopeless, okay, I might be feeling hopeless, but I still have faith in things. So if I still have faith in things, I'm not really hopeless.
Right.
Right. And when I'm feeling hopeful, but I'm struggling with my faith, I can remember that, well, if I'm feeling hopeful, I'm feeling faithful.
Yeah.
Right. It's human nature to struggle with both of those things. Like, I think everybody struggles with their faith and what they believe in and coming to terms with things. And even if you're the most devout, stalwart Christian, the idea of God is humongous.
Humongous.
And it is terrifying. And it's a lot to take in. And it's so unbelievably normal, I think, to grapple with your faith
Yeah.
and to wrestle with God. But to me, I had to remind myself that those words are pretty synonymous,
Yeah.
right? And I also had to, for myself, this doesn't apply to everyone, but I had to look at my personal patterns of hope. Like, when does it come? When does it go? Why is it fleeting at times? And I realized that as much as it feels fleeting at times and like this mercurial thing I can't quite get a hold of, it's also always there. Like, I look back at my day, like you and Mina look back on your day and you find the good. I look back at my day and there are dozens of moments of hope that I can go back and hold on to.
Yeah.
I can go back and kind of put into my bag and realize, like, no, bro, you have hope. You're focusing on the 3 or 4 negative things that happen throughout the day that make you feel despair and make you feel like your hope is crumbling.
Mm-hmm.
But look back at all the hopeful things that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. I agree with that. My wife has some teachings on it. She's really good on etymology and everything, and Hebrew and so forth. But essentially, the idea of hope is that hope is a lubricant.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have hope, you dry up.
Mm.
And so, and she applied that at one point in one of our conversations to the birth of our son. She was in labor for over 60 hours. And we tried to do it in certain ways, and we didn't want to go to the hospital and do all the medical ways. We tried, but it didn't work. And so ultimately, what happened was because she'd been trying for so long, the birth canal dried up.
Mm.
And our little guy, somehow his instinct was, I can't go down that canal. I'll get stuck, or it won't be good.
Yeah.
And so they ultimately had to lubricate the birth canal and then at that point it was very quickly that he came. And so this idea that you can't even birth new dreams or anything in life without there being
the lubricant
of hope. And so you just get dried up. And so that's really helped me. And the other thing somebody taught me at one point, because I believe that hope and faith are synonymous as well, but I've also learned there's maybe a little delineation for me anyway, is that sometimes hope is almost prophetic. It's like God comes and plants a seed in your heart of what can be. And that's the hope. When the hope is planted, then it's faith that moves me toward that hope to the manifestation of it. And so I view like these promises that they're just in my spirit. They're just there. Like they were planted in there. And some days where I just can't, I can't see how it's going to happen. It's that hope that kind of makes the dry places lubricated, as it were, so I can keep on moving forward. And I find without hope, without those promises that there's something better coming, then I dry up pretty quickly. And I can do it just as quickly as anybody else.
Sure, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's definitely a choice to believe, but it is like a mystical thing, like that hope that just kind of gets planted in your spirit.
Yeah.
And you don't know why, but you believe it. You're like, okay, I'm going to move forward on that in faith.
And I to me, it's correlated with gratitude.
Amen.
Because things I'm grateful for, little moments I'm grateful for, infuse hope into me, and it lubricates that hope. I love that phraseology. Yeah. But so I think it's a practice.
Yeah.
And like I said with you, like a lot of your optimism and your paradigms you've come to cultivate, they've become muscle memory at this point.
Yeah.
Because they're practiced every day. And so I think sometimes people struggle, like, how can I feel hope in such a hopeless state? And how can I be grateful? Like, things are abysmal right now.
Yeah.
But it becomes a practice where even if you had everything taken away from you, you would find ways to find hope and be grateful because you've been doing it for years.
Yeah.
And you don't need sunshine and bliss to be grateful and to feel hope.
Right. And I think what I would say to people who might be having that thought process right now, well, that's great for you, but, is that I've actually been reminded recently of some of my journey and some things I need to return to, because what got me here won't get me to where I'm supposed to go next. And so I have to level up. And I'm looking back on it, and you're absolutely right. Like 5-6 years ago, or maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I started doing this for about 2 or 3 years straight. I did what was called the 21-day brain detox. And it was this program that I was religious about, like where you take a toxic thought and you go through this systematic approach to replacing it with a positive thought. And then you nurture that for another two cycles of 21 days. And so the theory was that you could replace toxic thoughts, on a regular basis, and it was backed by neuroscience and everything. But yeah, I think you got to take your inner world really seriously, because everything is happening at the quantum level first. It's happening at the spiritual level first. And when you go to the external world to solve problems, you'll be dealing with fruits, not roots. You're much better going to the roots, and you'll be able to go and impact the fruits. And so, but I think that's one of the paradigms you have to adopt and kind of flip upside down. Because, Jesus and what he taught was his whole kingdom is upside down and inside out. They were expecting this like crazy, military ruler, but he came meek. He came into the city, meek, riding on a colt full of an ass, right? Different than everybody thought, right? And so I think that principle applies in this situation. We have to really take our inner world seriously and put the same type of effort. You got to go to the mental gym, you know. And so I'm looking back, and to a degree, I've done that, and this is motivating me to do that even more intentionally.
Right.
So, but that's me saying that. I'm not saying because there are people who are dealing with mental and emotional illness. I 100% respect that journey and understand how real that is.
Yeah.
And so that's not me being like blue skies about it, but I am saying like the work, that internal work is all the people I'm reading right now, all the people who seem to be achieving great things have taken that work seriously.
Yeah. Well, Brydon, I could talk to you all day about. There's a lot of things I'd love to just sit and talk hoops for a while and talk books.
Yes.
I really appreciate you coming on. Do you have any last questions or complaints or?
Oh, I don't know, man. Like, I think if I never got to come on the pod again and share anything with the audience that gets to view this, I think I've said most of the things that need to be said, but I probably just capstoned everything. Like for me, it's been the greatest journey of my life has been that long journey from the head to the heart, and understanding who God is and just how good He is, the goodness and the grace of God, and that's become the foundation for my life. I lived my life, and still to a degree live my life, so much on performance and find my worth from that. But I'm just grateful that I get to live a life now that's more based on grace, and I get to live and get to live under the covering. It's not fair. Grace is scandalous.
Yeah.
Like it's a scandal, right? Like I get to live under this favor and this wisdom and this prosperity and all these things that are available to me that I never did anything to deserve. And I guess I've become okay with that. And so I would say to anybody listening, if there's any last message I have, it's the message of grace. I think I'm learning it, and grace is awesome. And when it's the foundation of your life, it changes everything.
Yeah. And that's, that's giving people grace and also giving yourself grace.
Yes. Horizontal, vertical, the whole thing.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're good at giving yourself grace?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I'm better at giving myself grace than others. I'm getting better at it though. I can, the minute you say you're good at something, you start to see areas where you're not. And so my current perception is that I am, but I love this journey with God, that He's constantly saying, okay, you thought you were good there, but now you're ready to unlock this level, right? So let's go on that together. I don't think there's a sequence to it. You might have your room 119 on level 3 might be just filled with light and truth, but mine might not be. And so it's a very customized curriculum, and I think it really has to be led by God. And so my current understanding is that I do give myself a lot of grace, but I'm open to learning that maybe I could do better.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, and it sounds like maybe you could do a little bit better with giving other people grace. Yeah. And I think most people are the opposite. Yeah. Like most people more easily give grace but struggle to give it to themselves. Right. Right. Well, Brydon, thanks so much for coming on, bro. I did wanna give you a random shout out. I think your son is the coolest little kid in the whole world.
Yeah, man.
And I feel like he's already so dynamic and smart, and it's such a testament that he has two awesome parents.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thanks, bro. He's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
He's a little dinosaur right now. But
He's on your hat.
yes, he is. Yeah, that's him right there, man. He's got the hair and everything. But no, he's a bridge. You know, he's got a lot of things spoken over his life, and I'm excited to see what the Lord does with him.
That's awesome, man.
Thanks,
Okay,
man.
well, if people want to find your music, you got your Prince Ivan project,
Yes.
which is kind of a Justin Timberlake-esque
Yeah.
group.
Yeah, and definitely want to check that
Spectropop.
out. Spectropop, that's right. And releasing a new project called the Unity Project very soon, which is exciting. So definitely check that out. And yeah, King will come for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much coming, bro.
Yeah,
Woof.
I'm excited.
I'm excited too.
I feel like I'm an honorary member, but
Me too.
and then writing. Do you have anything in the works?
Yeah, I'm working on Mina and I, we want to write books, and so we're working on that. We're gonna launch our own podcast soon. We had a YouTube channel, but we're gonna relaunch as a podcast. So I think that will kind of the same path you're on is like we'll do podcasting, but eventually that'll lead to books. And I'm building online courses. I've developed a whole methodology that is getting really close on just life and business coaching, but specifically for music business for independent artists. So I'm working on that. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we'll put all your links in the show notes so people can check it out.
Hit it.
But my guy, appreciate you.
Love you, bro.
Okay. I love you too.